Hey, think you know which way it's going to go? Make your bet at Sports Interaction. Whatever your sport, Sports Interaction has you covered pregame. Live betting on all major sports, and of course, prop bets. Who doesn't love those? Want to bet? Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. 19 plus. Please play responsibly. All right, so this is Nailing the Apex on SDPN with Tim Hauraney. Usually it's going to be Tim on his own, but Jesse and I had to join him for this because obviously we're big fans, and Drive to Survive this year is unbelievable, episode 1 through 10. So we're doing 3 right now, and the episode starts catching you up in Miami. You know, that was a big race on the calendar. You know, the fake yachts, which everybody was talking about. Ferrari, this is the beginning of the Ferrari problems that were the ultimate undoing of Mattia Binotto, but obviously that comes later. Ferrari doesn't pit. Red Bull does during a safety car. Verstappen on fresher tires, and we start to see that sort of really, that kind of then plays into Monaco, where they have the double, box. Oh, no, wait, stay out, costing Charles Leclerc another first place in his home. You know, he's a Monegasque citizen.
Yeah, would have been. I mean, that guy in Monaco has got so much bad luck. Like
pole position the year before, crashed the car.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, like he didn't even start that race. Like it's been a disaster after disaster after disaster for him in Formula One, racing at his home race. And 2022, like I thought that was the year
he was going to win.
It was going to happen, and then they brought him in.
Who's going to? How could you pass?
I remember even watching it, and I tweeted out I'm like Ferrari is pitting Charles Leclerc. Like actually, question mark. I'm like what?
Yeah.
I don't know.
He lets out like a fuck on the radio, and you can just sense it in him. It was hard to watch.
So because it then goes to Silverstone, but I want to talk about the Miami and Monaco snafus, because those are the first times where people were like, "Hey, Mattia, like not great," and he was like, "Well, I don't really think."
We don't know what could have happened if we did the other way.
Yeah,
was his excuse,
and that's what it is. It's an excuse.
Yeah.
So when you're a driver and your teammates in, how does a screw up like that happen at this level with Ferrari?
Strategic, right? I mean,
how does that happen?
There's just so much strategic, and I think like whether or the ins and the outs of why Ferrari does what Ferrari does, nobody knows that answer, and it's just. It's if you're a driver, it's extremely frustrating because sometimes you know better than they do about what you need. And there actually were a few points within the season that I actually remember Carlos Sainz actually telling them like, "Hey, no, we're not doing this. That's not what I need. This is what I need." And he was right. And I think when you're a driver like Leclerc, who is he listens and he does what he's told. And I think that's, getting the opportunity to get into Formula One. I think that's also knowing how fortunate you are to be in Formula One.
At Ferrari.
Yeah. I think knowing at that point where you are, but at that moment in your career, you know that you're now that number one, and you're going to have to do things that the team may not like, but you're going to have to do them so the team can get the win.
Right.
And that's sometimes disobeying orders.
Right. And so when you've got, and again, the guy, not just Mattia, but the strategist, the race strategist is no longer in that position for Ferrari because of things like that.
No.
When you were watching that, and you're watching that live, and then you watch, the reaction to it on Drive to Survive, and you're a driver yourself, what do you feel?
Questions. Just why? Because for me, when I see something like that, I always assume that like, okay, they must know something that I don't, or they're seeing something that I can't because they have all of this technology and I've got my laptop and
a feed.
a feed. And so sometimes you can feel the rhythm of the race though, and you can see how the driver's driving style changes as the race starts to evolve and the tires start to kind of go away. And you kind of see that the car is doing little tiny things differently than what it was doing before. And then you're kind of like, okay, and then you're looking at lap time, which is very helpful. And you're saying, okay, these tires don't look like they're going to hang on here. And it's like, maybe it's time to bring him in. But then there's times where you're like, wait a second, it doesn't look that bad.
So what I didn't understand is the same person calling for one driver to pit or the other driver to pit, or do they have two separate people calling pit stops for their drivers?
You kind of have the strategist, the team principal, your engineer, and they all kind of have to talk, communicate, work together. Strategy's kind of like, hey, we think this is the best. We've looked at simulation data, and this is the fastest way to victory, or this is the fastest way to the end of the race. So we need to do this, we need to do this, and then we need to do this. And then for some weird reason, sometimes like in that season, Ferrari sort of like tap danced around it, or they were improving through some of it, and you're just like, no.
Yeah. Well, you don't know how it happens at that level.
And like blatant things like at Silverstone when Charles Leclerc should have pitted and put on new tires. He would have held off Hamilton. He probably would have won the race, and it seemed like Mattia cost him that by leaving him out there on the old tires.
And then by like also telling like Carlos Sainz like, hey, you're gonna have to hold off, Lewis Hamilton,
and he's like, no, I'm not doing that.
Why
I'm going for the win.
Why would I do that when I have fresh tires and I can just go racing?
Yeah,
like, and he didn't listen. Like, he didn't sit there and try to hold off Hamilton.
I don't know any driver who would.
No, that doesn't make sense.
That's how you got to Formula One.
For them to make that decision and tell Charles and Carlos that, they clearly seemed in over their head at moments where. I don't know if like everything's moving too fast or if they're getting too much information or what it is, but they're making decisions that just didn't make sense for the drivers.
Could also be too much information, right? I mean, that's a good point. I mean, it could be something.
It's a problem of this age, right? You almost have too much to work with.
But also it could have been, and I don't know the internal particulars at Ferrari. I'm assuming this, but it could also be that you have so many different individuals that maybe that information's flowing through, and then they also have their own ideas as well as what they want to do, and
so they put their spin on it.
And then maybe it's just like, hey, no, I agree with this, I agree with this. Wait, what do you say? Instead of having just one individual who just focuses clearly on one thing, one objective, one job, and then delivering on that one job. That's probably what they're going to look more like this season, I think.
Yeah. Well, and so Jesse, you bring up a really good point about Silverstone, because in this episode, obviously, you see this is the second episode that mentions the crash with Joe Grand U, and I want to talk about the Halo technology that they improved later on.
Sure.
But essentially, what happens is you got the race start right off the bat. George Russell and Joe get into that terrible accident that involved a few other cars. I think there was a Williams car in there as well.
Alex Albon.
And then Verstappen loses engine power. He's in the middle of Sainz and Leclerc. Leclerc gets a second start at it. He has a great start.
Yeah.
Verstappen's on him. Verstappen loses engine power. Esteban Ocon slows down. Sainz says he's faster than Leclerc. And then the team order, when Ocon slows down and has to stop, and they have to do, they're behind a safety car, all the cars come back together again. And it's Carlos Sainz that pits, Charles Leclerc that doesn't. And in third place, you got Lewis Hamilton, who's coming on strong in his home race. I have never heard a team issue an order like, not only are you going to stay behind the guy with worse tires than you, but stay 10 car lengths back.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard an order like that?
Never.
Is that even possible to do?
It's hard, because even if you're on new tires, I mean, it's like you, as a driver, you want to be aggressive, you want to attack, and you want to go hunting. And if you have someone in front of you for position, you're going hunting, right? And it's kind of like it's really hard to like hold yourself back from actually going on attack mode and like going into preserve and protect. And it's like, well, wait a second here, like why would I be doing that? I can win this race right here and open up a nice little gap, and Charles is on his own. Like, I want to win a race here and get my confidence up. I mean, that's what got me into Formula One to begin with, right? That's like
it's a mentality,
right?
And that was his first career win, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And they're holding him back and telling him not to go for it. And Adam, I'm disappointed you didn't mention the greatest part of the entire season,
which is
through goes Hamilton.
Oh yeah.
That was Silverstone. That was when we had it was like 7 car changes within the span of like a couple meters, and through goes Hamilton.
That was a great call.
Unbelievable.
I get goosebumps
That's awesome.
feeling. I remember that.
Yeah.
Oh, it was one of the best moments.
Yeah,
Oh,
me too.
yeah.
I was like, this is an awesome
This
race.
is awesome. Oh,
I think the entire world breathed. There was nobody was breathing at that moment.
Yeah, it was
And you
awesome.
just want Bono to say, Lewis, it's hammer time. Like let's go.
Yeah.
Let's freaking go.
Yeah.
And and that's that. This is that is the magic of Formula One is
Yeah.
things like that. But it didn't have to be magical. That race should have been clinical.
Yes.
Yes.
That should have been boring.
Charles should have changed tires and won.
Yes.
That's how that
Yeah.
shit ended.
Yeah.
There's no through goes Hamilton. It's Ferrari 1-2. Now, I found it fascinating, and I remember this getting a lot of play on social media, and I'm so glad they used it. So Carlos wins, and Charles is pissed.
Yep.
Right? And I don't think he's mad at Carlos so much as because he wouldn't have done this. He would have done the same thing.
Yeah.
I think he's upset at the team. And you see this clip, and this made the broadcast for Sky Sports. It's Mattia Binotto saying whatever he said, and I can't lip read in Italian because I think they were speaking Italian to each other.
No idea.
But he points his finger a few times. Charles finishes fourth, and then puts his arm around him. And there are rumors that those two didn't get along, and I wonder if that was the maybe beginning of the undoing of their relationship.
Yeah, it might have been, right? I mean, I think if you're Charles Leclerc, you had quite a few opportunities to not only extend your lead in the championship, because he was leading this championship for a little while, and you probably had a chance at maybe even winning this championship if, again, like we had mentioned in our other podcast, if you make sure your reliability is strong
And you win the French Grand Prix. And
you don't have a driver mistake, and then also your strategic department does their job.
Yeah.
And so there's these three things that kind of work together. But then you've got Mattia Binotto, who's kind of like the head coach overseeing sort of everything. And it's like, I think there were moments where Mattia needed to be a little bit more forceful behind the scenes with certain departments in terms of like strategy. For instance, like, why wasn't there some sort of a restructuring or bringing in some help for Inaki Rueda? Like, why wasn't there something done there? Why? Like, and then on the other side of that, he's going on television and basically just saying like, oh, we'll be better. We'll whatever, not really telling us what exactly is going on here. He has been at the team for so long, right?
Yeah.
He was a team player. He's a team guy. I'm sad to see him go, to be perfectly honest with you, because I think he did a lot of good at that team. Like,
the rise that they've had in the last few years.
well, if you take a look, remember when they got slapped because of whatever was going on with their engine, and I think it was 2019. He comes in and has to sort of retool that engine department, get the power unit back up to a competitive level a few seasons later, because they have a tough season. I believe it was 2020, and then 2021 they start to get a little bit better with things, and then 2022
has to get the right driver lineup. I mean, he also had to move on from two of the most popular Ferrari drivers ever, Vettel and Raikkonen.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So like, and that's the thing. I don't like, his job was difficult. Working at Ferrari there is a ton of pressure. It's I always kind of compare it to like the Maple Leafs, where it's like, if you're playing for the Maple Leafs, or you're working for the Maple Leafs, or you're the head coach of the Maple Leafs, a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure from the media, there's a lot of pressure from the fans, because the fan base is so huge. It's similar with Ferrari, where it's like there's a lot of pressure on team principals, a lot of pressure on the people who work. There's a lot of pressure on the drivers.
It's a different kind of pressure because of how important the brand is.
Yeah, that too. That too, right? And then you've got the Tifosi on top of that. You've got, like, there's fans who hang outside of their factory, like, just hanging out. Like, there's
they just hang out?
Just hang out. Like, there's fans who try to get on their try to get close to the racetrack that they've got there just to take pictures. Like, there's Ferrari is huge in Italy. I cannot stress that enough. Trust me.
I think people say that, or they hear that and they go, oh yeah, well duh, but I don't think you get it.
Yeah.
No, there is so much pressure on those guys, and like, I like, like we said in the other podcast, I like the move of Frederick Vasseur coming over. I don't necessarily like how they, dismissed Mattia Binotto or parted ways, whatever they're calling it. I still think he would have served a purpose, because In my opinion, he's a power unit engine guy. Like,
That's what his strength
yeah,
is.
like, you don't want to get rid of that guy, right?
Well, they're paying him to sit on the sidelines for 18 months, so I'm sure somebody's going to be after him.
But if you're Charles and Carlos and like you have a boss at any job and you question your boss's decision making and your boss is making decisions that don't really benefit the work that you're doing, I understand their frustration with him, you know, and understand their frustration with the entire team if they're seeing things completely different than the actions that the driver should be taking. So like I get their frustration and you have to move on if nobody's getting along, you know, and you're not getting the results that you should be getting.
They pulled Charles out of Alfa Romeo after a year, 1 year in the sport, right? You know, or sorry, not in the sport, but in the, you know, at this level, and put him in Ferrari car. That's pretty crazy. You know, he had Vettel there, but still. Is this a case of Ferrari backing the guy that they really believe in? Is this like the upper management? And I know this isn't really technically a part of this episode, but I mean, since we're here.
That's the thing, because like I always assumed that Charles Leclerc was their guy. But then when Carlos Sainz beat him in the points in 2021, I kind of was like, ooh, I mean, that's interesting. He's new to the team, and he just did that to Leclerc. That's fascinating. And then you see that Carlos struggled at the beginning of 2022. Actually, he really struggled. But then as the season progressed, he got incredibly strong. And it's kind of like, my opinion, I don't know if they have a particular number one just yet. That being said, Leclerc's one lap pace, qualifying pace, is in another league. It's the racing that needs a tiny bit of work and clean up a bit. But
Had things gone the right way, he could have won the French Grand Prix and the Monaco Grand Prix in 1 year, which is a pretty big deal.
Silverstone.
And Silverstone for a guy from Monaco, though, like home.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So hopefully, I do hope at least this year he gets it. For God's sakes, let him have Monaco. Anyway, so that's a wrap on episode 3. Let's move on to episode 4.